Hello, welcome back. This is Brian Kidd with Unriddler. If you have any other training needs, please visit us at unriddler.com. Today we're talking about the SAP ALV grid, and in this section we'll be talking about sorting. And the sorting of the data is going to be important uh, in just seeing the data as we want to see it, but also when it comes to adding subtotals that we'll talk about later. But we have the common sort order options such as ascending or descending order, but we also have the ability to sort by multiple columns that we'll discuss shortly. Okay, we're back on the SAP ALV grid, and to recap, we're talking about the actual cost line items report today. But again, these concepts can be used within any SAP ALV grid report. So it's not specific to cost center reporting, uh, but in this case, that is the report that we're using. If you use the ALV grid very much and you prefer to use a dialog box to make these changes rather than making changes to the report directly on the grid, you will become familiar with the this cube icon here that has the text change layout, and you'll be referring to this because this is kind of the hub of making changes to the ALV grid. So let's open it and see what options we have. You'll notice that we have several different tabs across here. We do at the top have a description of the current layout that we're seeing, and we'll talk about some of these other options later through the course, but currently we're talking about sorting the data. And if we go to sorting the data tab, we'll see that currently we do not have any sorts because in the sort criteria or subtotals list, we have no columns listed. Now, contrary to that, on the column set, and this is the column set list displays any column available to us. We have all the columns that are available in the report listed here, and I'll show you how to go through and create a sort based on this. Now, because we're looking at cost center actual cost line items, it may be beneficial to see the data sorted by the posting date. And in this case, if I want to see it by the posting date, I have the option here, and we have many options, but I have the option here of the posting date. And what I want to do is to have this posting date field moved over to the sort criteria or subtotals field. And to do that, there's a couple of different ways to do it, but probably the most simple way to do it is to first select the column by clicking the left mouse button and then using these buttons below to add it. Now, because I'm moving from the right to the left, I want to use this button to add the sort criteria. So once I click that, it's going to move the posting date over into the list on the left. And by default, let's talk about these two columns, at least for right now, it will default to sort in ascending order. And if I were to move this over, and we'll talk about this briefly, this is the same icon that we see on the toolbar over here. But by default, the radio button in the sort in ascending order column is selected. But I do have the option to also select the sort in descending order column. In this case, because it's posting date, it makes sense for me to see it in descending order because I may want to see the most recent costs that have been incurred on the cost center. I'm going to choose sort in descending order, and then I'm going to choose this adopt button, and this green checkbox we'll see throughout the course of this SAP ALV grid. But I'm going to choose that, and by choosing that, I'm letting the system know I want you to adopt those changes that I've made on the change layout dialog. So now that I've made that change, you can see that my data is now sorted in descending order. Let's notice that SAP, and I'm going to move this over just a little bit, but you can see that SAP puts this red arrow in the column, and the triangle is currently pointing down, and that is an indicator that we are sorting in descending order. I'll show you also that when you sort in ascending order, you get a similar icon on the column header, but it will be pointing up to indicate that's in ascending order. But back to looking at the actual data, the posting date is now sorted in descending order. So we have 331, 31, 228, and we can see the data. Another thing that SAP does by default, and this can be changed, and we'll talk about that in the display options section of these videos. But by default, SAP merges these this column rows together so that it is very apparent where the new data starts. So uh, for the 331 data, I can easily see that it consists of these rows, and then when we get into posting dates of March 1st, we see a new section. We have the date shown again, but again, the columns below that where it repeats of March 1st, those data sets will not be displayed here. It's just going to be blank. Okay, that's well and good, and we like doing it from the change dialog that we saw earlier. But there is another way to do this, and I'm going to close this change dialog and show you how to do that. I do have the data currently sorted by posting date and descending order. But if I wanted to change the sorting without opening the change dialog, I can do that by selecting the column header. And I've already got a sort here of descending order, so I'm going to change this to ascending order. In the toolbar options that I showed earlier, I'm just going to choose this option of sort in ascending order. And by clicking on that, you'll notice that now the data is sorted in ascending order. It still has these merged rows where we don't see the data, but we can see that our data set starts in January 1st and January 31st. So we applied the sort basically directly on the screen itself without opening the change dialog. And as I mentioned earlier, the icon here on the column header uh, is a little bit different. This triangle is now pointed up to show that we are actually sorting in ascending order now. Okay, next, if we want to sort on multiple columns, so for example, let's say that I want to see the posting date uh, sorted first, but after that I wanted to see my data sorted by the cost element column. Uh, this is quite easy to do, and we saw a little demo of how to select two columns earlier, but I'll talk through that again. If I choose to see the data sorted uh, first by posting date and then by cost element, and because I want to see both of these columns sorted in ascending order, there's kind of a shortcut to do that, and I'll do that by first, uh, and you may ask, well, why are you selecting the posting date again? You've already got a sort on it. Well, I have to, once I click this button, I'm telling it, okay, whatever columns I have currently selected, those are the columns I wanted to sort on. So if I actually do want to sort by posting date and cost element date, I need to choose both columns. Now I'm going to show you what would happen if I didn't do that. If I only chose cost element, and I'm selecting the column simply by clicking on the column header, and if I choose sort in ascending order, we can see what happens. The system saying, okay, the only column that you had selected was the cost element column. So I'm assuming that you want to only sort on that column. So now I'm seeing my data sorted by cost element, but I no longer see the data sorted by posting date. So if I do want it on both columns, I need to first select all the columns that I want to sort on. I'm going to select the posting date, and I can do this a couple of different ways. I tend to click on the column header and drag across to choose that second column. But I can also, I'm going to click away and deselect those columns. I can also click the column header and hold down my control key if the columns happen to not be next to each other. I'm going to hold down my control key and then select that column by clicking on it, while holding the control key. So I'm telling the system I want to do a multiple select, and now that I've selected both of these columns, I'm going to again choose sort in ascending order from the toolbar, and now I have the data as I wanted it, which is sorted in ascending order by posting date and then by the cost element date. And as I scroll down, I can see that the data is first sorted by posting date. I, again, out of habit, tend to choose whichever column that is the first sort. I tend to like to see that on the far left-hand side. And if I have an additional sort, I usually move that column to be the second in the list. That's just personal preference. I like to see the larger group on the left-hand side and the smaller group on the right-hand side. But again, that is simply personal preference, and it's based on how you select the columns here. But I want to return back to the change layout dialog. And once we open this and move to our sort order tab, we're going to see that both columns are here. And again, I did that directly on the ALV grid, but I could as easily done that from the change layout. And just to show you that I can do that, I'm going to include the cost element name in the sort. So I'm going to select the column, move it over to our list, and now that I have this listed, I can see that my first sort is by posting date, my second sort by cost element, and my third sort by cost element name. If I wanted to change this around, and let's say I wanted to see the cost element data set, and I'm talking about both the cost element and the cost element name. If I wanted to see that first, I could simply choose this posting date and use this option to move the selected row down one position. So if I click it once, it's going to move it down, and if I click it again, it's going to move it to the bottom. So now I've told the system my primary sort is by cost element and then by cost element name, and then I want to see the data sorted by posting date. So let's adopt those changes and let's return back to the ALV grid. And this is displayed the data as I mentioned earlier. It's a little bit different than the data the way that I would typically sort it. I would usually want my cost element name to the far left and my posting date to the inside. But again, that's all personal preference. What I'm showing here is that the data, I'm seeing a data set for 131. And then my cost element is 211,100, and I also see the merging of the columns. This makes a little bit more sense to me when I take this column and drag it over, and now I can see the data in a little bit different format. Now that didn't change the sorting. I'm still sorted first by cost element and cost element name, but now I'm showing the posting date to the right of that. If I switch this up, and I again can just click the column header, scroll over, and keep holding, and then release, and click sorting ascending. Now I'm telling it, okay, my primary is by cost element, my next is by cost element name, and my next is by posting date. So it's really if you're doing the sort from the ALV grid, it's really about how and which order you select the columns. Or if you don't want to have to think about that, return to the change layout dialog, choose the sort order tab, and move your columns up and down and set the sort in ascending or descending order from this screen. Both of them work equally as well. Some are easier to do from the change layout dialog though.